The readings today deal with practicing charity towards our neighbor. We know with the commandments there are three. The first three commandments deal with our relationship with God, and the next 7 with our relationship with our neighbor. 7 commandments dealing with our neighbor. And the first reading of the Mass today seems to reflect the commandments. You shall not steal, you shall not lie, swear, shall not defraud your neighbor, shall not withhold overnight the wages of your day labor, etc. And ending with, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That's from the book of Leviticus. And our Lord reiterates that when saying that the most important 2 commandments are loving God with all your heart and soul and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Those 2 commandments are summarized, of course, in the 10 commandments. And in this Lent, as we think primarily we think of self-denial and the sacrifices that we are making. The practices of charity are by far the most important, and we're striving to fine-tune our charity towards our neighbor, our love for our neighbor during this Lent. And our practices of self-denial should be directed to that end, to deny ourselves so that we can give to our neighbor, so we can love our neighbor and practice charity to them and to God, and our obligations to God, to love God more, and by denying ourselves. And in the Gospel, our Lord gives us the command to practice the corporal works of mercy, to clothe the naked, to care for the sick, to feed the hungry, to visit those in prison. These are the things we have to do to get to heaven, our Lord says. This is a condition. If we don't do these things, we don't care for our neighbor in these ways, He will say to us, depart from me, you accursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So we do have to do these corporal works of mercy to enter heaven. Looking after our neighbor, caring for our neighbor. And it's interesting because you look at some of the other commands of our Lord, that we need to turn the other cheek, we need to go the extra mile, we need to make these extra practices of charity to our neighbor. And He's like clearly saying that we can't just be civil to our neighbor, we can't just be at peace with our neighbor. We have to show extraordinary charity to our neighbor. We need to go the extra mile in loving our neighbor. He doesn't want us to just be civil. He wants us to be overflowing with charity, not just the minimum, but really reaching out to our neighbor. That's what a Christian is called to do. Not the minimum, but as much as we can, to be overflowing with charity. Of course, our Lord showed that example to us first. He put up with the imperfections and of the apostles, living in their company, patience with them, showing that extraordinary charity to the apostles, and of course to the rest of the world at the time, but even more with Judas, knowing his perfidy. So we are reminded here and stressing this importance of charity, a focus during this Lent, to fine-tune our exercise, our love for our neighbor, loving our neighbor because of our love for God. For the love of God, we love our neighbor. For the love of God, because God created each and every one of us, and He loves all of us, and He wants us to love what He loves. That is why we must love our neighbor. And so let us also remember the presence of Jesus in our neighbor, that Jesus takes personally the actions that we make towards our neighbor. He takes it all personally. He identifies Himself in our neighbor, and so we have to try to see Him in our neighbor, and that the way we treat our neighbor, we are treating God, who we cannot see. We treat our neighbor who we can see, so we show our love for God in that way in our neighbor. So Let's ask Our Lady to help us to fine-tune this perfection in charity to our neighbor.
Et Jesu